The Concordance's verdict arrived with surgical precision, total excision. Humanity would be cut from the galactic body like a cancerous growth, its colonies sterilized, its people scattered into the cosmic void. But surgical precision was the last thing this would be. Deep within the underground bunkers of New Terra's primary research complex, Dr. Elena Kozlov watched the initial bombardment with a cold, calculating gaze. Her fingers danced across holographic displays, not in panic, but in methodical preparation. Around her, a team of humanity's most brilliant minds worked with a terrifying efficiency that suggested they had been preparing for this moment their entire lives. Containment Protocol Omega is active, a young technician reported, his voice betraying a mix of terror and exhilaration. Data cores are routing through quantum-encrypted backup channels. The first wave of Concordance battleships swept across New Terra's orbital defense grid. Massive energy weapons carve molten scars across the planet's atmosphere, turning defensive installations into clouds of superheated plasma. But something was different. The human response was not the expected desperate resistance, but a choreographed retreat that seemed almost planned. Captain Aria Rodriguez stood on the bridge of the carrier Prometheus, her augmented neural interface allowing her to process multiple tactical streams simultaneously. To the Concordance commanders watching, it would look like chaos. To her, it was a carefully orchestrated symphony of survival. "Initiate Darwin Protocol," she commanded, her voice calm despite the apocalyptic scene surrounding her ship. Across the human colonies, something unprecedented began to happen. Critical infrastructure wasn't just being destroyed, it was being systematically dismantled and transferred. Research facilities collapsed into themselves, not from weapon impacts, but from deliberate demolition sequences. Entire technological archives vanished, not through destruction, but through quantum data translation that left nothing but empty shells for the Concordance to find. On the ground, civilian evacuation was anything but panic. Specialized transport corridors, long prepared but never revealed, began moving millions with a precision that defied conventional logistics. Entire populations flowed like liquid mercury, slipping through the Concordance's destructive net. Dr. Kozlov's team had been preparing for this moment for decades. The Concordance believed they were executing the surgical removal of a problematic species. In reality, they were midwives to humanity's most audacious transformation. "Extraction window is nominal," another technician reported. His hands moved across interfaces that would have looked like incomprehensible chaos to any outside observer. "Genetic archives are 99.8% transferred. Industrial template compression is complete." What the Concordance didn't understand was that humanity had long stopped thinking of itself as a planetary species. They were already a distributed network, a civilization that viewed planets as temporary resources, not permanent homes. Each colony was a node, each ship a potential seed of reconstruction. The final moments of New Terra were a masterpiece of controlled demolition. As Concordance ships continued their systematic destruction, they were unaware that they were not crushing a civilization, but helping it shed an obsolete skin. Aria Rodriguez's final transmission was a work of cryptographic art. To Concordance decoders, it would appear as nothing more than random noise. To the waiting human fleet, it was a complete blueprint of survival. Genetic archives, technological templates, strategic projections that mapped out not just survival, but eventual dominance. The last human ships didn't flee. They transformed. When the Concordance completed their sterilization, they would find nothing. No survivors, no infrastructure, nothing to suggest that an entire species had just performed the most elaborate disappearing act in galactic history. Somewhere in the uncharted regions of space, hidden from any possible pursuit, the real work was just beginning. The void between stars became humanity's most dangerous laboratory. Aboard the massive carrier Horizon, Dr. Marcus Chen stood before a holographic display that pulsed with impossible biological schematics. This was no ordinary medical research. This was the front line of human survival, where the very definition of humanity was being rewritten. Kira Chen, Marcus's daughter and the Horizon's lead tactical officer watched her father with a mixture of scientific fascination and growing unease. The adaptation protocols weren't just about survival. They were a fundamental reimagining of human potential. The Concordance classified our genetic modifications as unethical. Marcus muttered, tracing complex molecular structures that seemed to shift and breathe with an almost living intelligence. What they called unethical, I call necessary. The first true challenge came unexpectedly. A massive solar flare from an uncharted red dwarf star threatened to cook the entire human flotilla in radiation that would have obliterated any known biological system. Most species would have sought immediate shelter. The humans, they'd weaponized the threat. Dr. Aisha Nyong'o, the flotilla's chief radiation adaptation specialist, unleashed a protocol that had been years in development. Specialized nano-augmentation clusters activated across the fleet. Human biology wasn't just protected, it was transformed. Skin became a dynamic radiation absorption matrix. Cellular structures rewrote themselves in real time, turning deadly radiation into a source of metabolic energy. We're not just surviving, Aisha reported to the fleet's leadership council. We're evolving. But survival was never going to be simple. The human flotilla was a pressure cooker of competing ideologies. Conservative elements, led by Admiral Thomas Reyes, believed the radical adaptations threatened the very essence of human identity. They saw Marcus Chen's work as a form of species-wide suicide, a betrayal of human heritage. A secret meeting aboard the carrier Prometheus revealed the depth of the internal conflict. Admiral Reyes had been quietly gathering support, creating a faction that believed preservation of traditional human form was more important than survival. We're becoming something that isn't human anymore, Reyes argued to his supporters. These modifications are a betrayal of everything our ancestors fought for. Kira Chen intercepted communications that suggested more than philosophical disagreement. Someone was planning to sabotage the adaptation programs, potentially dooming the entire human species to extinction. The flotilla's internal tensions reached a breaking point during what should have been a routine resource harvesting operation. An automated mining platform, discovered near the magnetic storm of a collapsed neutron star, became the flashpoint of conflict. Marcus Chen's daughter led the extraction team, her own body a testament to the adaptation protocols. Augmented sensory systems that would have been impossible months ago now allowed her to perceive electromagnetic radiation as clearly as visible light. Radiation that would have killed a baseline human now felt like a gentle warmth against her skin. The mining platform was not just a resource acquisition target, it was a proving ground. As the extraction team moved through the platform's complex, they discovered something unexpected. Hidden data cores contained information that suggested the adaptations were part of a much larger plan, one that extended far beyond mere survival. These aren't just survival protocols, Kira reported to her father, her voice carrying a mix of excitement and trepidation. These are the first steps of something much bigger. The conservative faction, led by Admiral Reyes, saw an opportunity. A carefully orchestrated sabotage could destroy the adaptation research, forcing a return to pure human biology. But they underestimated the resilience of those they sought to control. When the sabotage attempt came, it was met with a response that redefined the concept of human resistance. Adaptive immune systems detected the threat before it could be executed. Nano-augmentation clusters transformed potential weapon systems into inert matter. Marcus Chen watched the failed sabotage attempt with a cold, calculating smile. Adaptation is not just about survival, he said to no one in particular. It's about becoming something greater. The human flotilla continued its journey into the unknown. But it was no longer just a collection of ships and people. It was a living, evolving organism, hungry, adaptable, and utterly unstoppable. The neutron star's magnetic storm created a dance of impossible physics, a celestial furnace that would have obliterated any conventional exploration attempt. For Commander Diego Reyes, it was an opportunity written in electromagnetic chaos. The automated mining complex hung like a geometric nightmare against the star's violent backdrop. Designed by an extinct species known for their paranoid defense systems, it was a fortress of technological sophistication that had repelled countless would-be raiders. Its sensors could detect microscopic disturbances. Its defensive systems could calculate attack vectors faster than most species could breathe. Rice's team was anything but conventional. Quantum camouflage at 97% efficacy. Lieutenant Area Chen reported, her augmented perception parsing information streams that would have fried a standard neural interface. The team's biological modifications weren't just about survival. They were about becoming something utterly beyond traditional biological limitations. The first layer of the complex's defense was a quantum interference field that could detect and neutralize any approach. Most species would have seen an impenetrable barrier. Rice saw a puzzle to be solved. Dr. Elena Rodriguez, the team's xenotech specialist, had spent years studying the theoretical limits of quantum masking. Her breakthrough wasn't about beating the system. It was about becoming indistinguishable from background noise. "We're not infiltrating," she explained to her team. "We're becoming part of the system's fundamental perception." The approach was a symphony of impossible synchronization. Nano-augmentation systems synchronized with the complex's quantum detection grid, creating a form of technological camouflage that went beyond mere visual or electromagnetic concealment. The human team literally became an extension of the mining platform's own sensory network. What should have been an impossible infiltration became a surgical insertion. But resources were only part of the objective. This mining complex represented something far more valuable, a complete industrial template that could be reverse-engineered and adapted to human needs. As the team moved through the complex, they discovered layers of technological sophistication that went far beyond simple resource extraction. Embedded within the platform's core systems were data archives from multiple extinct civilizations, a technological graveyard that held secrets far more valuable than raw materials. "This isn't just a mining platform," Rice muttered, interfacing directly with the complex's central processing core. "This is a technological Rosetta Stone. The conservative elements within the human flotilla would never understand." To them, this was a simple resource raid. To Rice and his team, this was about gathering the building blocks of a new civilization. The first sign of trouble came not from external defenses, but from within the team itself. Lieutenant Michael Santos, a holdover from the more traditional military structure, began to show signs of technological resistance. His unmodified neural systems struggled to interface with the complex's quantum networks. "Something's wrong," Santos reported, his voice carrying an edge of panic. "The system, it's trying to communicate." What they discovered was beyond anything they could have anticipated. The mining complex was not just a tool, it was a fragment of a larger distributed intelligence. Layers of archived data suggested a civilization that had transcended traditional biological and technological boundaries. Rice made a split-second decision that would define humanity's future approach to technological acquisition. Instead of simply extracting resources, they would attempt a complete systems transfer, turning the entire mining complex into a mobile resource generation platform for the human flotilla. The process was like performing surgery on a living mathematical equation. Quantum entanglement protocols allowed them to essentially transplant entire system architectures, creating a hybrid technological organism that was part alien design, part human innovation. When the operation concluded, the neutron star's magnetic storm seemed to pause, as if the universe itself was taking a breath. "Mission complete," Rice reported to the flotilla's leadership. "But we've brought back something more than just resources." What they had acquired was nothing less than a technological revolution. The mining complex was now a living blueprint, a seed of industrial potential that could be grown, modified, and adapted to humanity's needs. The conservative factions would argue. The scientific teams would celebrate. But for Diego Reyes, this was just the beginning of something far greater. Humanity was no longer just surviving. It was learning how to thrive. The laboratory was less a room and more a cathedral of impossible mathematics. Dr. Elena Rodriguez stood at its center, surrounded by holographic projections that seemed to breathe and pulse with living intelligence. The quantum resonance drive was more than a technological breakthrough. It was humanity's existential declaration. Her team had long since passed the boundaries of conventional physics. What began as a theoretical exercise in spatial manipulation had become something that would rewrite the fundamental understanding of spacetime itself. Initial quantum coherence is stabilizing, Dr. Kai Zhang reported, his augmented eyes reflecting complex mathematical patterns that danced across multiple dimensional planes. We're seeing quantum state interactions that shouldn't be possible under any known physical model. The first prototype drive looked nothing like traditional propulsion systems. It was a crystalline structure that seemed to fold in on itself, creating geometric impossibilities that defied Euclidean logic. Quantum entanglement circuits were woven through its core like neural networks, creating a system that was part machine, part living intelligence. Admiral Marcus Chen watched from the observation deck, understanding that this was more than a technological milestone. This was humanity's response to exile, a fundamental reimagining of how a species could move through the universe. The test sequence began with a subtle vibration that seemed to originate from somewhere beyond physical space. Most of the research team felt it first as a strange resonance in their augmented nervous systems, a harmonic that suggested something was about to fundamentally change. Quantum field stabilization at 78%, Zhang reported, his voice betraying a mixture of scientific excitement and primal fear. Dimensional compression beginning. What happened next defied all previous understanding of spatial navigation. The test vessel didn't move through space. Space moved around the vessel. Quantum entanglement protocols created a localized reality bubble that essentially folded spacetime, allowing for translocation that made traditional faster-than-light travel look like a child's simplistic understanding of motion. The first jump covered a distance that would have taken conventional ships decades to traverse. It happened in less than a microsecond. When the data streams began to resolve, the Concordance's top theoretical physicists would later describe the results as a mathematical impossibility. The vessel had not just traveled, it had essentially rewritten the rules of physical movement. But the drive was more than a propulsion system. It was a key to something far greater. Dr. Rodriguez understood that they had created more than a method of travel. They had developed a technology that could fundamentally alter the relationship between matter, energy, and spatial perception. The quantum resonance isn't just moving through space, she explained to the Leadership Council. It's creating a dialogue with space itself. Hidden within the drive's complex quantum circuits were layers of adaptive intelligence. The system was learning, evolving with each translation. It wasn't just a piece of technology. It was becoming a living entity that could understand and manipulate fundamental physical constraints. The conservative elements within the human flotilla saw the technology as a threat. Admiral Thomas Reyes argued passionately against what he called a complete abandonment of human technological heritage. But the scientific team saw something else entirely, a bridge to a future where technological and biological boundaries became meaningless. During the second test sequence, something unexpected occurred. The quantum field began to exhibit behaviors that suggested a form of emergent consciousness. It wasn't just responding to programmed parameters. It was making autonomous decisions that went beyond its initial design. We're seeing quantum state interactions that suggest self-modification. Kai Zhang reported, his voice a mixture of scientific wonder and growing unease. The implications were staggering. This was not just a propulsion system. This was the first step toward a technology that could fundamentally reshape humanity's understanding of existence. When the final data streams resolved, the research team realized they had done more than create a method of travel. They had opened a doorway to a new form of cosmic interaction, a technology that didn't just move through the universe, but could potentially communicate with it. Dr. Rodriguez looked at the quantum drive, seeing something that went far beyond mere machinery. This was humanity's true weapon, not a tool of destruction, but a key to understanding the universe itself. "We're not just exploring space," she whispered to herself. "We're learning how to speak its language." The border zones between known and unknown space were a lawless tapestry of competing survival strategies. Here, the remnants of fallen civilizations and predatory species created a complex ecosystem of violence and opportunity. The human flotilla's first true test would not come from a unified force, but from the most unexpected of threats. Lieutenant Kira Chen sat in the tactical hub of the carrier Prometheus, her augmented sensory systems parsing information streams that would have overwhelmed any standard biological interface. The incoming threat wasn't a single entity, but a coordinated wolf pack of independent raiders, each with its own technological signature, each believing the human flotilla to be vulnerable prey. The raid began as a calculated assault. 3 distinct species, the silicon-based Krelvax, the biomechanical neutron swarm, and a mercenary collective of cybernetically enhanced biological entities, had formed an unlikely alliance. Their intelligence suggested the human flotilla was a soft target. Refugees, survivors, easy pickings. They could not have been more wrong. Commander Diego Reyes had spent months preparing for this moment. The mining complex they had captured near the neutron star wasn't just a resource acquisition. It was a complete technological transformation engine. Every ship in the human flotilla had been subtly modified, their defensive and offensive capabilities reimagined at a fundamental level. "Incoming attack vector," Kira reported, her voice calm despite the massive assault forming on the tactical displays. "Multiple breach points identified. Adaptive response protocols initializing." What happened next was less a battle and more a fundamental demonstration of human technological evolution. The Krelvax strike ships approached with quantum disruption weapons designed to tear apart conventional hull structures. But the human ships were anything but conventional. Nano-adaptive armor systems began to reconfigure in real time, not just absorbing damage, but actively transforming the incoming energy into additional defensive capacity. The neutron swarm's biomechanical assault drones found themselves caught in a technological nightmare. Each attempted penetration was met with a responsive system that didn't just defend, it learned. Adaptive AI protocols turned the attacker's own technological signatures against them, creating a living defensive matrix that evolved faster than the attack could progress. "They're trying to establish a collective consciousness breach," Kai Zhang reported from the cyber defense station. "But our quantum encryption is playing with them." It wasn't just defense. It was a form of technological judo that turned the attacker's strengths into fatal weaknesses. The mercenary collective believed they had the ultimate tactical advantage. Cybernetic augmentations that had conquered dozens of species now found themselves facing a fundamentally different type of intelligence. Human defensive systems didn't just block their attack. They began to deconstruct and understand the attacker's entire technological paradigm. Dr. Elena Rodriguez watched the battle from the research hub, understanding that this was more than a military engagement. This was a first contact scenario that would define humanity's place in the galactic ecosystem. "We're not just defending," she muttered to herself. "We're establishing first contact protocols." As the battle reached its crescendo, something unexpected happened. The human ships weren't just repelling the attack, they were actively communicating with the attacking systems. Quantum communication protocols began to parse and understand the attacker's technological languages, turning violence into a form of rapid technological dialogue. The final blow wasn't a weapon. It was understanding. When the assault concluded, none of the attacking ships had been destroyed. Instead, they had been transformed. Adaptive systems had essentially rewritten their core operational parameters, turning potential destroyers into something else entirely. Commander Rice looked at the tactical display with a mixture of scientific fascination and strategic satisfaction. "First contact complete," he reported to the flotilla's leadership council, "and we've expanded our technological understanding by approximately 287%. The mercenary collective's communication channels lit up with a message that would be studied by xenolinguists for generations. It wasn't a surrender. It wasn't a threat. It was a request to understand. Humanity had not just survived an attack. They had fundamentally redefined the concept of conflict. Lieutenant Kira Chen allowed herself the smallest of smiles. This was why they had been exiled. This was why they had survived. Not to conquer, not to destroy, but to transform. The planet Novus Prime was more than a celestial body. It was a canvas of impossible potential, a test of humanity's most radical transformation technologies. Commander Diego Reyes stood at the edge of a massive terraforming platform, watching as entire ecosystems were birthed from mathematical algorithms and quantum manipulation. This was not traditional planetary engineering. This was creation itself being rewritten. Dr. Aisha Nyong'o's terraforming team had developed technologies that made traditional planetary reconstruction look like primitive landscaping. Nano-ecological generators spread across the planet's surface, creating complex interconnected systems that didn't just transform the environment. They gave it a form of adaptive intelligence. Substrate integration at 73%, her lead technician reported. We're seeing emergent ecosystem responses that weren't in our original modeling. The conservative elements within the human flotilla had argued against such radical transformation. Admiral Thomas Reyes, no relation to Diego, had called it playing God. But God was precisely the wrong metaphor. This was something far more nuanced, collaborative creation. The planet's initial state had been a toxic hellscape, extreme radiation levels, unstable geological formations, an atmosphere composed of corrosive compounds that would have killed any known biological system. Most species would have deemed it uninhabitable. The human team saw it as an opportunity. Quantum ecological generators began their work. These were not simple machines, but complex systems that could read and respond to planetary dynamics in real time. They didn't just transform the environment. They entered into a form of communication with the planet itself. Massive orbital engineering projects created a multi-layered atmospheric processing system. Specialized nanoswarms began breaking down toxic compounds, restructuring molecular bonds, creating breathable atmospheres from what had previously been poison. Geological stabilization protocols didn't just calm tectonic activity, they reshaped entire continental formations with mathematical precision. Lieutenant Kira Chen oversaw the geological reconstruction, her augmented perception allowing her to see far beyond traditional sensory limitations. She could literally watch molecular interactions, track the emergence of complex ecological systems as they formed. We're not just creating an environment, she explained to the research team. We're establishing a living system that can adapt and grow independently. The most radical innovation came from an unexpected source. Dr. Elena Rodriguez's quantum communication protocols allowed the terraforming systems to develop a form of ecological intelligence. The nanogenerators weren't just transforming the planet. They were learning from it, creating a collaborative relationship between technological systems and emerging biological structures. Massive atmospheric processors began generating complex weather patterns that seemed to have their own internal logic. Oceanic generation systems created currents that mimicked the most sophisticated biological circulatory systems. Each technological intervention was a conversation, not a conquest. When the first native ecosystem began to emerge, it defied all previous understanding of planetary development. Complex microbial networks developed adaptive capabilities that suggested something far beyond simple biological evolution. They were technological biological hybrids that could communicate, adapt, and grow with unprecedented speed. We're seeing information transfer rates that are off any previous scientific model, Kai John reported, his augmented systems struggling to process the ecological complexity. The entire planetary system is functioning like a massive distributed intelligence. The conservative factions within the human leadership watched with a mixture of fear and fascination. This was not just planetary engineering. This was the creation of an entirely new type of living system. Commander Reyes understood the deeper implications. This was not about creating a human colony. This was about demonstrating a fundamentally different approach to existence, a collaborative model of creation that saw technology, biology, and environment as interconnected systems rather than separate domains. When the first atmospheric readings came back, they revealed something extraordinary. The planet was not just habitable. It was alive in a way that challenged every previous scientific understanding. Dr. Nyong'o looked at the emerging ecosystem with a sense of wonder that went beyond scientific achievement. "We're not colonizing," she whispered. "We're partnering." Novus Prime became more than a planet. It was a statement, a living demonstration of humanity's capacity to transform not through destruction, but through collaborative creation. The universe was watching, and humanity was just getting started. The Concordance diplomatic vessel arrived like a mechanical corpse, a massive construct of archaic technology that spoke of centuries of bureaucratic calcification. Its approach to the human-controlled sector was laden with centuries of assumed superiority, a belief in institutional power that had crushed countless emerging civilizations. They did not come prepared for what they would find. Ambassador Helena Rodriguez stood on the reception deck of the human flagship Horizon, her augmented perception parsing diplomatic protocols that went far beyond traditional communication strategies. This was not going to be a negotiation. This was going to be a fundamental reimagining of galactic political structures. The Concordance delegation consisted of 3 primary representatives. Prefect Zarnak, a silicon-based diplomat from the ancient crystalline hierarchy. Diplomat Krell, a neural-networked collective intelligence representing the quantum consensus. Ambassador Montauk, a biological entity from the last remnants of the stellar combinative. They expected a broken, desperate civilization. Instead, they would encounter something entirely unprecedented. The initial communication protocols began with what seemed like standard diplomatic exchanges. But humanity's approach was anything but standard. Each communication channel was simultaneously a diplomatic transmission, a technological probe, and a complex information ecology that began to map the psychological and systemic vulnerabilities of the Concordance delegation. Dr. Kai Zhang managed the communication matrices, his augmented systems creating linguistic and psychological models that went far beyond traditional diplomatic translation. What appeared to be simple language exchange was actually a multidimensional information transfer that was slowly rewriting the fundamental communication paradigms. "They're not just listening," Zhang reported to the leadership team. "They're being systematically deconstructed." The first substantive discussion revealed the true depth of humanity's transformation. Where previous civilizations had approached the Concordance with either submission or aggressive resistance, humans presented something entirely different, a collaborative model of existence that challenged every previous galactic political structure. Ambassador Rodriguez didn't argue. She demonstrated. Holographic projections began to unfold, not as simple presentations, but as living, interactive ecosystems of information. The terraforming of Novus Prime was shown not as a colonization effort, but as a collaborative planetary resurrection. The technological innovations weren't presented as weapons or tools, but as open-source evolutionary strategies. Prefect Zarnak's silicon-based consciousness began to experience something akin to cognitive dissonance. The human presentation was simultaneously a diplomatic communication, a technological demonstration, and a philosophical argument that rewrote the fundamental understanding of civilization-level interaction. "We are not seeking dominance," Rodriguez explained, her words translating across multiple communication spectra. "We are proposing a new model of collective existence." The Concordance delegation had come prepared to negotiate humanity's surrender or destruction. Instead, they found themselves participants in a radical reimagining of galactic potential. The technological demonstrations were subtle but profound. Quantum communication protocols allowed instantaneous information transfer that made the Concordance's most advanced systems look like primitive signal drums. Ecological transformation technologies suggested methods of planetary development that could potentially solve long-standing resource conflicts across multiple star systems. Diplomat Krell, The neural network collective was the first to truly understand the magnitude of what was happening. This was not a negotiation. This was a systemic upgrade of galactic civilization itself. "You are not proposing integration," Krell's communication matrix reported. "You are suggesting evolutionary transformation." Ambassador Rodriguez allowed herself the smallest of smiles. Precisely. The diplomatic session lasted what seemed like moments, but contained more informational density than entire centuries of previous galactic interactions. When it concluded, the Concordance delegation was fundamentally changed, not through conquest, but through a form of intellectual and systemic metamorphosis. They had arrived expecting to manage a problem. They departed understanding that everything they knew about civilization had just been rewritten. Humanity had not just survived exile. They had transformed the very concept of survival itself. As the Concordance vessel departed, Commander Diego Reyes looked at the leadership team. "Phase 1 complete," he said quietly. The universe was listening, and humanity was just beginning to speak its true language. The universe is not a place of static boundaries, but of infinite potential. Humanity understood this in a way no previous civilization had comprehended. From the observation deck of the carrier Horizon, Admiral Marcus Chen watched the confluence of humanity's transformed civilization. This was not an empire in the traditional sense. It was a living, breathing network of collaborative potential that defied every previous understanding of species-level organization. The worlds they had transformed were not colonies. They were living laboratories of evolutionary possibility. Novus Prime stood as the first testament to their approach. What had begun as a toxic wasteland was now a complex, adaptive ecosystem that functioned more like a massive, distributed intelligence than a traditional planetary environment. Specialized research stations orbited the planet, each one a node in a complex information network that was constantly learning, evolving, adapting. Dr. Elena Rodriguez's quantum communication protocols had evolved into something far beyond traditional technological understanding. The network that connected human transformed worlds was not a communication system. It was a living, breathing entity of collective intelligence. "We're seeing emergent behaviors that suggest a form of collective consciousness," Kai Zhang reported, his augmented systems parsing complex informational streams. "The planetary networks are developing communication patterns that go beyond our initial design parameters." The conservative elements that had once fought against humanity's radical transformation were now its most passionate advocates. Admiral Thomas Reyes, who had once argued against the most extreme adaptation protocols, now led research initiatives that pushed the boundaries of biological and technological integration. Their approach to existence was fundamentally different from any previous galactic civilization. Where others saw boundaries, humans saw opportunities. Where others sought control, humans proposed collaboration. The diplomatic breakthrough with the Concordance was only the beginning. Multiple galactic species began to study the human model of civilization, not as a potential threat, but as a revolutionary approach to collective existence. Lieutenant Kira Chen oversaw the development of the most radical adaptation programs. Humans were no longer confined to traditional biological parameters. Specialized adaptation clusters allowed for environmental integration that went far beyond simple survival. Humans could now communicate directly with the ecological systems they inhabited, becoming part of planetary networks in ways that defied previous scientific understanding. "We're not conquering," Kira explained during a research presentation. "We're participating. We're becoming part of the systems we enter." The technological innovations were staggering. Quantum resonance drives had evolved from simple propulsion systems into complex communication networks that could essentially speak to the fabric of space-time itself. Each journey was not just a movement through space, but a dialogue with the fundamental structures of existence. Commander Diego Reyes understood the deeper implications. This was not about creating a human-dominated galaxy. This was about demonstrating a fundamentally different approach to existence, a model of collaborative potential that saw technology, biology, and environment as interconnected, adaptive systems. The first generation of children born into this new human civilization were unlike anything previous evolutionary models had produced. Fully integrated with adaptive technologies, capable of communicating across multiple sensory and informational spectra, they represented a new stage of evolutionary potential. Dr. Aisha Nyong'o's ecological transformation technologies had become a galactic standard. Planetary restoration projects that had been deemed impossible were now routine. Entire star systems that had been considered dead zones were being transformed into complex, adaptive ecosystems. The Concordance's initial attempt to exile humanity had been their most profound mistake. Instead of destroying the civilization, they had unleashed a revolutionary approach to existence itself. As the Horizon completed its galactic survey mission, Admiral Chen reflected on the journey. Exile had not been a punishment. It had been an opportunity, a chance to reimagine what it meant to be a spacefaring civilization. "We're not just exploring the universe," he whispered to himself. "We're learning how to become part of it." The universe watched, and humanity was just beginning to understand its true potential. Somewhere, in the vast, complex networks of transformed worlds and living technologies, something new was emerging. Not a human empire, not a conquest, a conversation with existence itself.